With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
Why take one vacation with the family when you could take all of them? With Royal Caribbean, you don't just go to the beach. You visit a private island and race down the tallest water slide in North America. You don't just go for a road trip. You ATV and zip line through the jungle. You don't just go somewhere new. You rappel down waterfalls and discover ancient temples. Because this isn't just any vacation. This is all the vacations. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
Hey guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. It's a thing. And now the truth is out there. I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun. Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free anytime, anywhere. And each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hey guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. It's a thing. And now the truth is out there. I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun. Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free anytime, anywhere. And each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hey there, Duke fans. This is episode number 626 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. We are back. I know it's been a few days, but we have been trying to come up with a bunch of news and throw it all together so we don't give you extended bites. This is the full episode of bites, a whole helping of 5-course meal that Jason and I have for you today. I am Donald One. I'm your host for this episode. He's Jason Evans. Jason, how are you this afternoon? It's Wednesday, May 8th. It's very, very hot where I live. Hopefully it's not as hot where you are.
Yeah, no, it's getting pretty warm down here in Atlanta as well. It's May. It's not quite summer, but kind of feels like it already.
Mm-hmm. We get that nice little week where winter, spring doesn't know what to do. It's 50 degrees. It was 60 degrees on Saturday. Didn't even break 60. Now it's 88 here. We just keep going back and forth. I will say very quickly, peace to everybody who is in the middle of the severe weather that we've had over the last couple of days across the country. Hopefully all of you out there who are listening to our voices are out of harm's way and that everything is fine where you are. But just want to send a special shout out to Portage, Michigan, place I've ran track at. They got hit pretty hard yesterday, and hopefully everybody there is safe and sound. Property can be replaced. People can't. So that hopefully is okay. I will say also, Jason, it is May 8th, and I know he's not on here, but it's Sam Klein's birthday today. So
oh, wow.
We will wish a happy birthday to Sam Klein in absentia. Of course, he's always a man of the people, the people's champ on this podcast. But happy birthday, Sam.
And by the way, it's worth noting, if you did not listen to the previous episode that we did about the history of the Duke Blue Devil, the folks who wear that outfit, wear that headdress, and come out and entertain the masses. Sam Klein, by the way, was one of them. A little more than about a decade and a half ago, Sam did it. But we did this episode. I've noticed that, it doesn't get quite as many downloads as people when they see we've got a news episode. Folks, do yourself a favor and listen to that episode. It is funny. It is informative. I think it's one of the more entertaining interviews we've ever done. And a large part of that is because Sam brought the knowledge, and it's a good time. So for Sam's birthday, your present to him can be listening to him and other folks talk about the history of the Duke Blue Devil.
Shout out Greg Garbos, who was the Blue Devil that inspired Sam to one day become a Blue Devil with his Trojan headband.
Oh, what an awesome
2001 NCAA tournament. So shout out my man. Greg Garbos. Okay, Jason, let's get into the many topics that we have on deck for today. First off, we want to start with Sion James, and everybody out there who has been paying attention to the transfer portal and who Duke's been bringing in know that Sion James visited Duke. I believe it was last weekend, and
just a few days ago.
Just a few days ago, and the reason why we were kind of waiting was in the hopes that he would commit to Duke and we'd be able to have a nice celebratory podcast where we, marvel at all of his abilities and what he brings to the table. Unfortunately, he has not done that yet. It sounds like, Jason, he will wait until next week to make a decision. I know he put his name into the NBA draft and he's going through that part of the process right now. So hopefully he goes through that and then decides to commit, but we won't do anything until we hear that official commitment from him.
Yeah, just so folks understand, and I want to be clear that we don't have sources inside the program who are discussing this, but just so people understand, Sion James has gotten invitations from some NBA teams who want to see him work out. They want to. He's going to get feedback. I mean, that's the honest God truth. They're going to say to him, "Here are the things we need you to work on. Here's what kind of a role we think you could play in the NBA," and that sort of thing. There's no one out there who's really saying he's likely to get drafted. In fact, there's not really anyone who's saying he would be extremely likely to get a two-way contract. It's possible if he decides to turn pro that he would get a two-way deal, but look, he wasn't invited either to the NBA Combine. There are about 80 players, 78 players, 80 players who were invited to the NBA Combine. He wasn't even invited to the G League Combine. I want to say it's like 40 additional players or so that were invited to that. So in theory, NBA general managers, NBA scouts, they've said this guy is not quite one of the top 120 or so prospects. That said, they are always interested in giving guys feedback and telling guys what they need to do to rise up the rankings. And that's something that Sion James is doing right now. And who knows, maybe he hears something from one of these teams that just blows him out of the water and he goes, you know what? I am going to go for it. But most folks think that's not what's going to happen. And most folks think that when he makes the decision to pull out of the draft, he will simultaneously probably, I don't want to jinx it, I don't want to say that we know this for a fact, but he will probably select the Duke Blue Devils as the school that he is going to attend next year for his, fifth year, for his COVID year after playing so well at Tulane. And like you said, we're not going to get into a lot of stuff about him. I've got some stats. I did some deep dive on some of the interesting things about his game. I'm going to save all that. I will merely use this one thing to let you know. For Duke this offseason, these transfers have been about fit. And Sion James, when I describe him to you, you're going to go, well, that kid fits. So it is, we're waiting, but man, you're going to get a good podcast when that kid makes his decision that we think is coming very soon.
I will also say that when we talk about the portal and the guys that we have already seen commit to the Blue Devils, Malik Brown, Mason Gillis, Sion James fits into that brand of athlete as well in the name of toughness, physicality. Sounds like we're going to get mean on the ball next year. And I think a lot of fans are excited about that, but we'll save that excitement for if he decides, we're not going to jinx anything either, if he decides to commit to the Duke Blue Devils and withdraw from the draft. Hopefully that comes early next week. Of course, when that happens, we will be here to react to that. But let's also talk about we don't necessarily like to speculate when it comes to player recruitments. We love speculating when it comes to the schedule and what teams may be coming down the pike. And per Jonathan Rothstein of CBS Sports, there's a couple of games that Duke fans should be made aware of that are in the works for next season. The first one, by the way, is that Illinois.
Hey, Donald, Rothstein's got some good sources inside Duke.
Yes. Yeah. And he has been
a little question about that.
A lot of the games that we've heard about that are coming, part of the schedule. John Rothstein's been breaking a lot of them. So shout out to him. Keep giving us the schedule. We love talking about it. But according to him, we have two games again that can be potentially added to the schedule. Illinois, the Fighting Illini will be playing Duke at some point at Madison Square Garden. That is what they're working on. I think they're working on dates and finalizing that. It could be a part of a, Coaches versus Cancer Classic that, or the Jimmy V Classic or something like that we have tended to do in the Garden. But that seems to be the Madison Square Garden game this year. Also, Jason, George Mason, top 100 team in KenPom last year, and in the net. on December 17th will be coming to Cameron. Of course, George Mason, a lot of people remember them. They have made some deep runs into the tournament. They've made it to a Final Four under Jim Larrañaga before he went to Miami. And George Mason would be one of those teams that we have talked about, a team that is pretty decent, will not be scared, and it could be coming off of an exam break for Duke if they're playing on December 17th in Cameron. So, Jason, let's talk about those two potential matchups. I like these matchups. I know you do as well.
Oh yeah, big time. Look, it's hard when you're talking about a major power conference team in this current day and age. It's hard, and I'm talking about Illinois here. It's kind of hard to know. Actually, major power, all teams at this point, it is hard to know exactly what teams are going to look like for the most part. You don't know who's coming back. You don't know who's in the draft or may not be in the draft and all that other kind of stuff. There are a million different factors in all these different things. But Illinois is the kind of program that is traditionally always a team that is hovering in the top 25 or so. And they play in the Big Ten, one of the important conferences out there. This will be a very good matchup. This is the kind of thing on a neutral floor that is likely to be a quad one matchup for the Duke Blue Devils in MSG. My bet would be that this is a game that will happen in December. Just in terms of what we know about the schedule in November and the such, I don't think there'd be room to play this during the month of November. I think December is much more likely. And then George Mason, which will also be a December game. Donald, as you mentioned, pretty likely to be the game sort of right around the end of the exam break. That after we get done with exams, we might have this opponent. I'll tell you something. I don't dislike it, but not super thrilled playing a team as good as George Mason. As you mentioned, they're a team that's top 100 in KenPom and in the net. But because it's a home game, if they're not in the top 75, and that may be, they might get there. Again, I'm not sure what George Mason's roster is going to look like, how well they'll perform. Maybe they get to the top 75, but if they're not in the top 75, it's not a quad one or a quad two game if you play it at home. So this is going to be a quad three game for the Blue Devils, but a pretty good quad three opponent. And these are a little bit risky. If you're going to, I kind of feel like if you're going to play a quad three team, maybe go down to like the 120s or 150s or so. Because, as you get into the top 100, maybe there's a little more risk there, but at the same time, look, you want to test yourselves. And if you play well and you beat that team convincingly, your net rankings, all the efficiency metrics are going to do wonders for your overall ranking. But it says something that for the, I don't want to call them cupcakes, but for the non-power 5 teams on the schedule, to have a team as good as George Mason, it says that Jon Scheyer is really, really pursuing an aggressive schedule for Duke next year.
And when you think about it, right, George Mason could be ranked 200th in KenPom and all the rankings, but George Mason has a little bit of a name attached to it, right? When you say George Mason, everyone knows where it is. It's right here in Fairfax, Virginia. They know the pedigree of the program, right? And so when you think about a home slate, I know a lot of people last year were disappointed in some of the teams that ended up coming to Cameron, right? Of course, we did get Arizona, but other than that, there wasn't a lot of fanfare around the games in the non-conference schedule of teams that came to Cameron. Most people couldn't pick Queens College out of a map. They probably thought it was in Queens, New York,
exactly,
instead of Charlotte, right? And of course, if you say, "Oh, it's in the Queen City," there's three cities in America that identify themselves as the Queen City, at least 3. So you have that problem. George Mason, you don't have that problem. But of course, we're Arizona is going to be on the road next year. We have Kansas in the Champions Classic. The SEC ACC Challenge.
No. We've got Kentucky in the Champions Classic.
I'm sorry, Kentucky. Yes.
Yeah, we've got Kansas
and Vegas. Arizona on the road, and then a potential SEC ACC matchup in Cameron. A lot of people, again, we've been speculating that it could be Arkansas. Now with all the changes in the coaching carousel, that it makes it a bigger matchup for them next year. But yeah, I think when you look at the schedule, I think it's not just that the coaching staff, Jon Scheyer, is going after teams that are decent, right? And creating a loaded schedule. They also want some name recognition behind some of these teams so that when people look at the schedule, they go, "Oh, George Mason, they're usually pretty good." When they play with those teams that are mid-majors that people have heard about because they've made a deep tournament run or they've, come to Cameron recently, that is where people get excited about the schedule as a whole. even Maine, right? People aren't saying, oh, Maine. I mean, we talked about how Maine might be the weakest team on the schedule so far to open up the season. But again, it's Maine. It's a team that people know about. It's a team that we've seen in the NCAA tournament, at least in when I say
where Maine is.
Yeah, they know where Maine is. They know that Cooper Flag is from there, but doesn't play there. So it's one of those things where I like the fact that they're going after teams that people know, because then when you hold the schedule up and you say people are paying their lots of money, right, to renew their season tickets, they go, oh wow, this is a loaded schedule coming. I'm really excited about watching this team play it. Also, the teams that are coming to play against us.
Yeah, and my last thing is, I talked earlier about the quadrants and such, and obviously it's something that you really start to focus on once you get into January, February, that kind of thing. But Duke playing Illinois on a neutral floor, Kentucky on a neutral floor, Kansas on a neutral floor, at Arizona, all those games are unquestionably going to be quad one games. It would take a pretty wild scenario, of an Illinois or, of someone being really bad, much worse than usual, for those games not to be quad one games. And in fact, several of those are probably likely to be like really high quad one, like, among the 10 or so most difficult games that may be played in all of college basketball between, power teams. And then probably getting an Arkansas, an Alabama, or an Auburn in the ACC SEC Challenge. Those are the three teams that seem most likely for Duke. Again, all three of those teams good enough that even coming to Cameron, likely to be a quad one kind of game. This is as I mentioned, talking about George Mason, this is a super aggressive schedule that Jon Scheyer is putting together. It's probably a couple quad one games more aggressive than what we've seen the past couple years. And it's a tribute, I think, to the team that Jon Scheyer believes he is putting together. It's a good sign when your coach is like, we're going to go out and play the best any place they want to play us, because we know we can beat them. That's the attitude you want, and that's the reality with next year's Blue Devils.
The fact also remains, and this is my final point in this, is that if the ACC is not going to give you those opportunities for quad one, games, then you got to go out and get them. And in other conferences, we talked about when we played Houston last year, they had 20 quad one wins, right? Much less the teams that they had lost to that were also quad one. They get those opportunities on a nightly basis. And for better or worse, right, the ACC is not presenting those opportunities in basketball right now, according to all the metrics. Of course, the ACC can change that by becoming better, but a lot of these teams just aren't giving the quad one wins, so that when they look at the resume, they go, hey, Duke has played a tough schedule. So if you haven't seen those in the conference schedule, go get them in the non-conference schedule. That's what I like about how aggressive Jon Scheyer has been with the schedule as we approach the fall.
I want to tell you a really funny thing. As you were talking, my phone started buzzing. It was Scott Rich, friend of the podcast, our sort of designated fill-in host. And Scott was texting me to say, I just saw that we're getting a game against George Mason. I love that we're getting an aggressive schedule where a potential top 100 team is our quote unquote easy matchup. So I said to Scott, I'm like, stop it, man. I'm talking about it on the podcast right now.
We're talking about it. Listen in a couple hours, Scott.
Exactly.
Love you, Scott.
Exactly.
But yes, that's exactly right. Go after these games. And then at that point, there will be no excuses. We got to go play the games. But we'll save that for the fall. Jason, let's take a quick break. We'll pause right here. On the other side, we're going to talk about some Duke players that enter the portal and are going elsewhere. And then also into a greater conversation about NIL, scholarships, and how Duke is structuring their roster after this.
This episode of the Duke Basketball Roundup is sponsored by BetterHelp.
Springtime is the season that's supposed to feel like a new beginning. We have better weather, and it feels like everyone gains a boost of energy. However, for many, leaving winter behind doesn't always mean that their mood lightens up with the extra sunlight. We all carry around stress, and that stress can build as more events get added to your calendar.
That's certainly true, Donald. And with the amount of social gatherings increasing with the improving weather and more daylight, there's more pressure to be on when you're interacting with family, friends, coworkers, even strangers, even when stress has you a little bit down. And for some, getting advice from a therapist can help you tackle some of that stress without affecting you or the people you care about. That's what BetterHelp is all about. It's entirely online, and it's designed to be therapy that's convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a professional, licensed therapist. And you can switch therapists anytime you want.
So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try and find your social sweet spot. Visit betterhelp.com/Duke Roundup today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Duke Roundup.
Why take one vacation with the family when you could take all of them? With Royal Caribbean, you don't just go to the beach. You visit a private island and race down the tallest water slide in North America. You don't just go for a road trip. You ATV and zip line through the jungle. You don't just go somewhere new. You rappel down waterfalls and discover ancient temples. Because this isn't just any vacation. This is all the vacations. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
All right, we are back. And Jason, let's shift to the roster of players from this past season. Of course, we had several guys enter the transfer portal. We have seen where some of those players have already ended up. And over the last week or so, we have heard about a couple of more guys who have made their commitments to play elsewhere. Sean Stewart has committed to Ohio State. He will play there next year. TJ Power remains in the conference. We thought about him going to Boston College. We had mentioned that he had gone to visit there, but instead he is committed to Virginia. So, Jason, that means we will see TJ Power next season at some point in Charlottesville. He will not visit Cameron. Duke only sees UVA one time, and that will be at the JPJ. But TJ Power remains in conference, which even despite the transfer portal is still kind of a weird thing for all of us to kind of recognize guys moving within conference to different teams and playing the teams that they left. But that is a reality, at least for TJ Power. Also, we have learned just in the last day or so that Christian Reeves has narrowed his list of teams to 4 schools: Vanderbilt, Clemson, Oklahoma, and Florida. It doesn't tell you when he's going to make that decision. That was Joe Tipton of On3 Sports who was making that report. But at least if he commits to Clemson, that will be another guy that we will see in conference next season. So, Jason, those 3 guys, let's talk quickly about their destinations, or at least where, in Christian Reeves' case, where he might end up.
Yeah, by the way, you neglect. We should also mention that Jaden Schutt he's still early in his portal process, but he apparently has taken a visit to Dayton, which would be, look, him going down to a mid-major, but one of the top mid-majors out there, a program that's been very, very successful. So, he'd have an interesting role potentially at Dayton if that is where he ends up picking. So the first thing that jumps out to me in terms of both Sean Stewart and TJ Power is that they're both walking into impressive Power 5 teams. And it looks pretty much like they're walking into at least great chances to start for both of those teams. Ohio State really does not have a lot in terms of big men on the roster. I haven't, we've been saying it's hard to tell exactly who's where and all that other kind of stuff. But you look at the Ohio State roster, what it looks like it's going to be. There's definitely I don't want to call it a hole, but there's an opportunity at the power forward slot. And it looks like Sean Stewart's probably going to get plenty of chances to play there and prove himself there. TJ Power, maybe a little bit more perhaps of a sixth man kind of role at Virginia, but like his primary competition, like at the small forward on the wing, is Andrew Rohde. Folks, I'm not going to get into all the stats because it's another guy we don't need to get into it. But Andrew Rohde was a terrible offensive player last year. Literally one of the worst 3-point shooting, one of the worst 2-point shooting percentages, not just in the ACC, but in all of college basketball. TJ Power is the exact opposite player, a guy who you would think would be able to really fill it up from the perimeter, a guy who's efficient on his 2-point shots as well. I know that Andrew Rohde is more experienced at Virginia. It probably has better defensive instincts. I think the question for Power is how well does he pick up that Virginia defense? How quickly does he pick it up? But Virginia's a team that really they need offensive help. Their offense was abysmal last year. I could see a scenario where TJ Power really bursts on the scene and plays a lot for Virginia next year and is one of their primary offensive weapons because, frankly, they just don't have that many offensive weapons.
Yeah, I was going to say Virginia being an offensive threat since when's the last time that occurred? 12, 13, 15 years ago?
When they had Ty Jerome and DeAndre Hunt, they had a few guys who could play.
They
offense.
had guys, but it's weird because like as a team, offense was never really like their strong suit, right? Like,
right,
I mean,
right.
There's guys that have been on their team that have produced a lot of points, and some of them, Malcolm Brogdon, right? When he goes to the league, he's been doing very well, right? And he did very well at Virginia, but for some reason, the pack line defense was always the centerpiece, and they would rather have a game go 45 to 43 than a game go 80 to 78. So that's just how that's just the philosophy of Tony Bennett, and has worked for him thus far. And so why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. By the way, and I wanted to mention about Christian Reeves. I don't know about you. I was a little surprised when I heard Vandy, Clemson, Oklahoma, and Florida, all Power 5 conference schools. Christian Reeves, a guy who, wasn't that highly regarded coming out of high school and, didn't get very much of a chance to play at all at Duke. Part of that was due to injuries, but part of that was, he wasn't really a guy who you felt like he was ready to play ACC competition on a regular basis. And here he is with some pretty impressive schools, some good programs looking at him. I think that's a very interesting list for him. And I'll just mention, look, we said TJ Power is going to Virginia. It's possible Christian Reeves goes to Clemson. Intra-conference transfers that used to be like this, you don't see that much of it. Man, it is happening everywhere these days. It is a super common thing. There's some guy, I blanked on his name right now. There's some guy who went from Alabama to Auburn.
Yeah.
I think there's some guy who went from Michigan to Ohio State. I could be wrong about that. I mean, we are getting.
That was Dakich. That was back in the day, though. That was Dan Dakich's son. Went from Michigan to Ohio State. Yeah.
Well, I've seen some transfers this year. There was Andrei Stojakovic went from Stanford to Cal. Folks, I just want you to be prepared. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year, but someday there's going to be someone to go from UNC to Duke or Duke to UNC. It's going to happen because the transfer portal is like that. And for a lot of these guys, it's a very transactional kind of thing. And people are going to lose their minds when that happens. But again, it's going to happen. And you can't be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Matthew Cleveland went from Florida State to Miami.
Yep.
Just this past year. Look, not Duke to UNC, but we're getting transfer pool decisions that are.
Let's put it this way: a lot of people in Miami were like, "Wait, he's coming where? He's coming here?" I know they're upset up in Tallahassee, and they were.
Hey, and as long as we're talking about transfers, as long as we're talking about roster construction and stuff like that, there are a couple notes I wanted to help people out with, to help folks understand what's going on right now. First one is, if you don't listen to the Ion College Basketball podcast, Gary Parrish and Norlander on their most recent podcast mentioned something that I've been talking about, Donald, for quite a while. When Duke gets its last look, Duke is after Sion James. We think we're going to get him. If we don't get him, it appears Duke is going to try and find someone else to be a guard. When Duke gets that person, I'm telling, that will be 11 scholarship players for the Blue Devils. I'm telling you that when that happens, 11 is the number. Duke will be all done in terms of pursuing players that are expected to play. And again, I've been saying this for weeks and weeks. I know there are people out there who are like, Duke still has 3 scholarships left. Stop it. Stop it. Parrish and Norlander spoke about this. They've spoken to coaches. Coaches are only counting to 11. Some coaches are only counting to 10. They just know it's impossible. It is impossible to keep number 12 and 13 happy unless those guys are like glorified walk-ons or something like that. Heck, it may be impossible to keep number 11 happy. And they would rather not have the hassle than have the depth all the way down to 12 and 13. So I'm telling you, that is just going to be the case with Duke. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, a huge part of all this portal stuff is NIL. And just the other day, I got a chance to talk to a source, a friend, a guy who is very much involved in, he's like a financial advisor. He's very much involved in talking to players and talking to their families and such. He knows about the NIL world. And what he told me was, it feels like NIL has doubled from last year. We are hearing about $1 million deals all over the place. I heard a little while ago that about a year or so ago that Kansas was the first program to pop sort of the $5 million payroll level. $5 million is nothing nowadays. It is widely believed that Arkansas, Kentucky, Baylor, Kansas, Alabama, Louisville are all going north of 5, and a lot of those schools are going like up 8, maybe even close to $10 million. And I'm just going to tell you that Duke is not far behind that. Now, one difference is Duke is mostly paying for freshmen and for returnees, and that can be a little bit cheaper. In the case of freshmen, especially, perhaps a lot cheaper than going after a guy in the transfer portal who's a veteran and ending up in a bidding war against another school. And it's worth noting that Carolina, UNC, who is getting desperate for a big man. They have missed on like 4 or 5 consecutive.
Oh, at least.
Yeah. Big men to replace Armando Bacot. Supposedly UNC offered Cliff Omori from Rutgers. I'm pronouncing his last name wrong, I'm sure. It's Omori or something like that. I can't, whatever. Cliff from Rutgers. They supposedly offered him $2 million. And he chose Alabama instead. And it's worth noting. He supposedly
I actually love that.
Yeah. Wait.
That's all $2 million? Nah, man, I'm still good. Appreciate it.
He took a lesser offer from Alabama. Now, I'm sure it wasn't like a $800,000. It's probably like 1.5 or something like that. But he took a lesser offer from Alabama because he said he wanted to go the program that could prepare him best for the NBA. Again, a guy choosing between Alabama and UNC said, nah, Tar Heels, that's okay. I want to go to the better NBA destination. Ouch, UNC, deal with that reality. That is brutal, my friends.
Let me first talk about the scholarships, because I think what you mentioned is important, right?
Yeah, I dumped a lot on you. It's your turn. Go.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And that's fair. And I think it all ties together. When we're talking about the transfer portal again, Sion James or some guard that could either back up Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor, or again, could stand in if one of them happened to be out for whatever reason. That's who they're looking for. But after that, they've been looking at guys who can, fill in the APR requirements or just also just be there kind of for bodies. Right. And, one thing that we've talked about, Jason, on this show, Stanley Borden could be that 13th guy, right? He's earned it. He's going to be a senior. He's, been a walk-on for 3 years, and he absolutely, it would be great if he was one of the guys that ends up with a scholarship due to his longevity, his loyalty, his years of service, as we would say.
Well, and a great part of the community, by the way, Stanley Borden. He's
absolutely
done fundraisers when they had a terrible earthquake in Turkey. He did a fundraiser. This is a guy who represents everything you would want from a walk-on kind of player. A guy who's not going to play minutes for you, but who makes your program look good and gives you a moral compass. Nothing's been announced, but I'm looking forward to the moment when they say, yes, Stanley Borden gets a scholarship.
Yeah. And the other reason, right? Like NIL could also be the reason why he doesn't get a scholarship. He could get an NIL deal that fulfills that purpose. Either way, like the idea is make sure that he's covered for next year. We've talked a little bit about Neil Begovic, and I think what a lot of people don't realize out there is that Neil Begovic does have a year of eligibility remaining because he redshirted at Stanford his freshman year. So despite the fact that he's been in college for 5 years, he's kind of the way of Ryan Young, where he could play a 6th year college basketball if he wanted to, I feel like that would be a guy who could also be under consideration for that 12th or 13th scholarship as well. But if not, Jason, I think you have they go after some guy again. You know, we've seen some of the guys like a Max Johns that comes in from a highly regarded school and is there to provide practice bodies, but also just to kind of be a leader on the team vocally from the bench and not necessarily a guy who we will see in any real minutes. Now, I think that all ties into NIL because you mentioned that a lot of these, these numbers have doubled. Well, there's an article, I believe it's from The Athletic, and it says just that. Like, usually they were saying that a starter was getting about 200,000 to 250, an all conference player about 300,000, 350,000, an all American would get about $500,000. Now it's the high end is going 800,000 to 2 million for an all American type of player, 500,000 for a starter. All conferences getting around 800,000 to 1 million. So you see a lot of people who, and it's almost like inflation, right? Inflation is going up. The price of the brick is going up, as Marlo said in The Wire. So it's one of those things where a lot of this talk that we have been having lately about NIL dollars and how they get distributed, how the NCAA chooses to distribute revenue from all their various tournaments to schools in an effort to keep players happy. This is all a part of that. And this is why the NCAA, really, really messed up by not addressing this a decade ago, because now you are in a world where, the open market is the open market. And again, who's to fault these players where if someone's saying, hey, I'll give you $2 million to come play for us, who's stopping them from saying no? It's already happening in football, right? We've had some instances of guys getting a couple $1 million to switch schools in football. We even had Nick Saban blurt out during the NBA or NFL draft that he was like, yeah, I was telling some guy you should enter the portal so we can pay you $1 million, and the kid never entered the portal. But you're going to have even that happening, right? A little bit of tampering going on where teams are kind of hinting at players, if you enter the portal, there might be an offer in the neighborhood of this amount of money for you to come down to our school. So the arms race is only going to get more Army, so to speak, because the coaches know that to win, they need to get the best guys, and to get the best guys, the price of the brick has gone up.
All right, Donald, we're going to move to something related but different. And I want to stress to everyone, this is not something that I really wanted to talk about, but it's something I think is important for Duke fans to hear. And I want to stress that I'm not necessarily endorsing what I'm about to tell you. I had a very candid conversation with a player parent, a father of one of the players on the Duke basketball team, last year's Duke basketball team. I'm not going to mention which player it was, and I would ask all of you not to speculate. Honestly, the conversation, the nature of it, the things they said could apply to any of the 7 kids who entered the transfer portal and left Duke. So I don't want to hear any of that. Oh, this is just so-and-so doing sour grapes, because that's not the case. And I've heard tangentially, not personally, I've heard other people, other player parents, other players feel similarly to this. And folks aren't going to like what I'm about to say, but they need to hear it. This parent said he wanted to clear some things up. He said he doesn't think anyone that decided to leave Duke this year left because of NIL concerns. In his words, he said it was never about money. For everyone who left, he thinks it was about playing time. He stressed, by the way, that his son never asked for any playing time guarantee. There have been some of the guys where it was rumored that they wanted guarantees. And he said that was absolutely not the case. He's seen fans talk about that. And he said, everyone who plays for Duke basketball knows that there is no such thing as a guarantee. That said, he said his son was told that he would not be a starter next year. The Duke was bringing in someone else, or there was someone else already on the roster who would be the starter at that player's preferred position. And he said everyone knows that Jon Scheyer plays his starters big minutes. So that automatically meant that this player who ended up transferring would not see significant time at Duke. And he said he had the impression that Jon Scheyer had already decided on this stuff. As he put it to me, if a company says it has no plans to promote you, no matter what you do, why would you stick with that company? He said he believes that Jon Scheyer looked at his roster for next year and simply decided there were some players that he didn't want on that roster. And he believes those players were shown the door and forced out. He said the math, said all you have to do is look at the math. Duke's bringing in 6 freshmen. Duke is seeking extra players from the portal. As he put it, Jon Scheyer did not have space for everybody to stick around. He had to get some players to leave. Now, I'm going to tell you what Jason thinks about this. I am very torn by this conversation. Like most Duke fans, I love seeing players develop in the program. There are few things as exciting as watching Mark Williams go from almost unplayable. Remember Mark Williams' freshman year, the first half, 2/3 of his freshman year? Like he started and played like 5 minutes. He was virtually unplayable. And then suddenly the light went on and he turned into a absolute force that continued his next year as well. There are few things as gratifying as watching a Jordan Goldwire or a Justin Robinson come out of nowhere to lead the team to victory. The way Jordan Goldwire did against Louisville, the way Justin Robinson did against UNC. And we could go on and on. Jalen Blake's last year, had a couple games where it was like,
Ryan
where
Young.
did this come from? We've loved seeing it over years and years. Remember Ryan Kelly? Ryan Kelly was unplayable as a freshman. We love that. But Jon Scheyer must field the best team that he can. If he thinks Cooper Flagg, Kaman Malawach, Malik Brown, Mason Gillis, and possibly Sion James can help Duke win more than Mark Mitchell, Christian Reeves, Sean Stewart, TJ Power, and Jeremy Roach. You see how I lined those up, by the way. If Jon Scheyer thinks Flagg is better than Mitchell, Malawach is better than Reeves, Malik Brown's better than Sean Stewart, Mason Gillis is better than TJ Power, and Sion James fits better than Jeremy Roach, then I don't think John has any choice. I think he has an obligation to bring those other guys into the program. And my last word on all this is the single biggest determinant over whether Jon Scheyer is doing a good job is whether this team wins games. And it is up to him to build the best roster he can with that goal in mind. And sadly, if that means some players feel like they were forced out, I'm not saying Jon Scheyer forced out, but if they feel like they were forced out, that is the reality of where we are right now in college basketball. It would not be uncommon. It would not make Duke different than any other program across the country. That said, TJ Power turns into Virginia's leading scorer. If Sean Stewart is routinely putting up double-doubles for Ohio State, if Mark Mitchell is an all-SEC defensive player for an improving Missouri team, if Jeremy Roach leads Baylor to the top of the Big 12, then the pressure on Jon Scheyer to win with the guys that he chose, it's going to be turned up to 11. Donald?
Yeah, again, a lot to unpack. I think, Jason, I can, people I know you can't see, but I can see, Jason, and I can tell that you're torn over this because you have a different perspective than I do, in that you are a father, right? You are a proud dad, and you understand when you're talking to this parent what that's like to not see your kid play, right? Or be the person that you think that they can be and they know that they can be. I get all that, right? I don't have that perspective where I can look at my godson and be like, yo, he's going to turn into a great athlete, which he is right now. But he's 5. So I don't have that perspective, right? And neither do my best friends. But at the end of the day, there's something to be said about, and I think where a lot of people feel torn over this is that, yes, I get it from the player's perspective. You want to play. Everybody wants to play. Everybody, like, I'm sitting there in the stands and I want to play. I know I can't, but we all have that burden, right? When we see our team down, we all feel like we can throw on a jersey and get on the floor and do better, right? But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, Jon Scheyer's job is to put forward the best team possible. And if he doesn't think that those guys are it, then that's where you have these tough conversations. And I will stress that I don't think, even when you're saying that, I don't think the conversations went like, yo, we don't need you next year, get out, right? Their roles have changed. And I think that's where it is.
Exactly.
a guy who's thinking, hey, I'm going to, everyone else ahead of me is gone. I'm going to get the starting opportunity or at least a chance to compete for that starting role. And to be told that you're not going to get that opportunity, it does sting. I have had that happen to me.
And for that matter, guys who were starters who are being told maybe you won't continue to be a starter, because that's part of this as well.
Yeah, and I've had that happen to me in my basketball career back in high school, right? But I went to a prestigious high school. I went to Detroit Country Day, and there were times where coaches came to me and said, "Hey, I know you're starting. I know you're doing great. This is literally nothing that you have done wrong."
So Shane Battier beat you out for a starting spot, didn't he?
Oh, no, he was older. I tried to beat him out. I just couldn't do it because he had committed to Duke at that point. But I think really, like, there was times where, and we see this in the NBA too, right? We've had guys who have left the NBA, have retired, and they said, yeah, early in my career, I was a starter. I was the man. I was getting, 30 minutes a game. I was scoring 15 points a game. And then the word came down from above that I needed to go to the bench because this other guy was deemed by the coaching staff or the general manager or the president or the owner, right? In college basketball, it's the same way. Just think about, Kentucky under Calipari. Every single year, it seemed like he trotted out 5 freshmen on senior night and said, these guys aren't coming back. Give them a round of applause. Because in his mind, that wave was coming out, the new wave was coming in. And I understand where the players are coming from that point. But Jason, I always think back to, again, when it happened to me, I was pissed about it, but I sat on the bench, I kept working hard, and eventually they needed me, right? I didn't even play JV my junior year because they said I was deemed, someone that they didn't need. Senior year, I was on varsity. And so do you know how hard it is for someone to not play for an entire year and still make the varsity team of a team that's destined to be one of the great teams? It's very, very hard.
Yeah.
So that was me. And again, I can't project that onto any other player, right? Because that was my life. That's how I lived it. That's what I chose to do. I could have quit and done other things with my time. I decided to stick it out, grind it out, and I ended up making the team. Did I play a lot of minutes? No, but I accepted my role and where I was going to be on the team. I knew that my mantra was always going to be stay ready. So you ain't got to get ready and you'll always be ready. So I think the idea is this. You just mentioned a bunch of players who had that mindset that we all attached ourselves to. Jalen Blake's, when someone was down, next man up. Jalen Blake started a couple games. He led the team in points for a couple of games. Yeah. And then when people got healthy, he returned back to the bench. Ryan Young had to start out playing, starting last year. And that was not the job that he was, brought in to do. He was brought in to be a guy who could get 10, 15 minutes, but he wasn't expected to play 30 in the first 3 weeks of the season. But he did that. Jeremy Kane was not a guy destined to start, but he worked his way into the starting lineup. Remember, TJ Pyre was the guy entering fall practice that we had heard was the 5th starter, or at least the potential for a 5th starter. And then it became Jeremy Kane, and Jeremy Kane did not relinquish that. Kyle Filipowski was the guy last year who was not projected to start it at all.
Over the summer, we heard how he was struggling with the progression of the college game.
He was a guy that's not quite got it yet. Well, we got it, and he got it very quickly. And again, enter the starting lineup on day one, never gave it up. You have those guys, Justin Robinson, who sat on the very end of the bench for three years and 8 months, it felt like. And then all of a sudden, the light in his bell clicked on, and he became an all-star. He became an all-American for a month, and it's still one of those.
Wasn't even a month, man. It was
robbed.
2 weeks.
it felt like it, but no, we were robbed of that opportunity to see how that played out because of COVID, right? And there was a lot of that about that team where we're like, man, who would have thought Justin Robinson would be leading us into this tournament, right?
It is painful to think about.
It's painful to think about because we know how hard he worked to get to that point. We interviewed him on this show before I think you met him at a Top Golf event in San Antonio.
I did.
And we interviewed him when he was still in high school. And he was like, yeah, I'm thinking about just coming to Duke and being a preferred walk-on, and we'll see how it goes. It went well, right? He's a beloved figure, and now he's back at Duke. So these arcs still exist. I think what pains people is that these arcs are going to be fewer and far between because in their minds, players are deciding to transfer elsewhere to finish out that story. And we don't get to realize the fruit of that not necessarily what we put into it, what we invest into it, but we don't get to realize the fruit of their labors. We don't get to see firsthand. We may follow Sean Stewart. We may follow Jeremy. I mean, Jeremy Roach is one thing, right? We'll follow those Sean Stewarts and TJ Powers and Jaden Schutz, but we won't get to see when they finally turn it on and they start, when Sean Stewart starts dunking on people and TJ Powers starts rain threes, unless it's against us, we're not going to see it as we did when they were on our bench. And I think that's where a lot of people feel upset. And that's where I kind of get the tornness of this, because the players need to do what they need to do. And we as fans hope they would stay and develop. And so we could see how that work paid off for them and be able to support them in that. And we will have to, but instead we have to do it from afar instead of them being a part of what we think could be a special season.
Yeah. And I guess the thing that sucks about all this is we, as fans, we want it both ways. There are so many people out there, when Duke would lose games this past season, people would be like, the opponent was so much older than us. They had all those transfers. They'd filled their roster with those guys that we don't get, because Duke has been, frankly, honestly, Duke has been late to the transfer game. And we've embraced it clearly this offseason more than ever in the past. And all of us are like, look at NC State. Every single starter, all 5 starters for NC State were guys who did not start their careers at NC State. And so as Duke fans, you're like, oh, this is not fair. We need to take advantage of this. But then there's the downside. Then there's the other side of all of it, which is if guys come in, someone else has to come out. And it sucks. And it feels unfair to us as fans to be denied the opportunity to watch these guys develop. This is the new world of college basketball. Duke's late to the party, if anything. But now we're at the party, and it's just, we have to learn to deal with it. But I thought it was important for folks to understand what that parent had to say to me. And he approved me relaying it to all of you. And I hope people appreciate it and aren't too upset by any of it. By the way, again, I don't blame Jon Scheyer for any of this. I wish the system could be different, but it's not. And wishing doesn't make it change.
I mean, I think we all want us to get the top 8 guys in every single recruiting class get 5 portal players that are all the top of the portal, and then to have them all stay for 4 years, right? And nobody leave. Like, nobody leaves. We'll have, if we did that, we would have a roster of 75, of which we can only field 14, and we could only play 5 at a time, and there's only 1 basketball. So
I think we all were hoping that this would be Zion. Last year would be Zion Williamson's senior year. Do I have that right? I think I have that.
Oh, right. No, what he'd get the COVID year, so he'd get another year. So do you know what RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish and Zion Williams could do with a COVID year? I'm just throwing that out there.
I don't think Cam would have been playing that much coming off the bench, because 3rd year Paolo Banchero would have been kicking butt.
Well, yes, we would have. Everyone's going to get the ball, Jason. We have enough basketball to go around, so everyone can come back and use their rest of the years of eligibility, and then all of a sudden, we'll have a bunch of people transfer in the portal. Everything's going to be fine, Jason.
Well,
we have 97 players on this team. That's
the formula for having all 13 guys on scholarship playing plenty of minutes and being happy with their time. When Zion and RJ and Trey Jones and Paulo and Mark Williams is your starting lineup, and you're beating teams by 40 points at the 10-minute mark, then suddenly you got plenty of time for Derek Lively and all these other guys. Yeah.
The sacrifices that must be made for us to win a title. We will do anything and everything. But I agree, Jason. It's an interesting conversation. Is one that kind of has been talked about even as we continue to pursue guys in the portal, and we're going to continue to pursue guys in the portal. Again, Sion James any minute now. Hopefully he decides to become a Blue Devil and leave this nonsense of the NBA behind him for at least 1 more season. But until then, we will end it here on this episode of Duke Basketball Roundup. Thank you as always to everybody for listening. Again, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Send us any questions, topic suggestions. We're in that part of the season. I think we got one, Jason, that we need to respond to. But if you have good topic suggestions that will make for a nice little Bites episode, please send them our way. But until then, hopefully we will be back to give you some good news in the transfer portal. But once we do that, we'll be off and running in the summer. Until that point, He is Jason. I am Donald. And now it is time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.